This yacht isn't for people like you." The words sliced through the humid sea breeze, sharp enough to turn a few heads. The luxurious yacht, floating like a palace on the waves, was alive with music, clinking glasses, and the soft laughter of wealthy guests dressed in designer suits and gowns. Golden lights reflected on the water, casting an aura of exclusivity and power. The one who spoke was Richard Hale, the yacht's arrogant event manager. He prided himself on running elite-only parties, where the guest list was filled with business tycoons, celebrities, and high-profile influencers. Anyone who didn't look the part was, in his eyes, a trespasser. Richard's sharp gaze had landed on a man walking calmly onto the deck. He wasn't in a tuxedo, nor did he have the sparkle of diamonds around his wrist. He wore a simple white shirt, neat but plain, and his shoes had no brand labels that screamed luxury. His posture was humble, his expression calm, and his hands tucked loosely behind his back. That man was Manny Pacquiao. Unaware or perhaps unfazed by the judgmental stares darting his way, Manny walked forward with a quiet smile. For the other guests, he was almost invisible, just another face in the crowd. But for Richard, this was an offense. How could someone so ordinary dare step into this world of the rich and powerful? "Sir," Richard sneered, blocking Manny's path. "This section is for distinguished guests only. You clearly don't belong here." His voice carried across the deck, loud enough for nearby guests to pause mid-sip and glance over. Some raised eyebrows, others chuckled softly. Manny, however, didn't flinch. His eyes remained gentle and his smile faint. He gave a small nod as if he had heard such words 1,000 times before. The calmness in his demeanor only seemed to fuel Richard's arrogance further. Behind them, the band kept playing, but a subtle shift in the crowd began. A few younger guests, curious about the unfolding drama, whispered to each other. Phones discreetly tilted in the air, recording the scene. A couple, Sophie and Jacob, exchanged a glance. This looked like something worth live streaming. What none of them knew was that this quiet man, mocked for his simplicity, was about to turn the entire yacht upside down. But for now, the humiliation had just begun. "Where are you watching from?" Drop in comments. Richard folded his arms, glaring at Manny as if he were a stain on the pristine white deck of the luxury yacht. The chatter around them dimmed, replaced by curious murmurs. Guests leaned slightly, pretending to sip their champagne while their eyes locked on the unfolding scene. "You think you can just walk onto this yacht?" Richard's voice rose, dripping with disdain. "Do you even know how much the people here are worth? This isn't a ferry boat, my friend. This is a world you don't belong to." His words stung, but not for Manny. They stung for the people listening because of the open cruelty. Manny simply bowed his head slightly, acknowledging Richard's outburst, but he did not argue back. His calmness was almost unsettling. One of Richard's assistants, a tall young man in a navy blazer, chuckled loudly. "Maybe he's a waiter who got lost on the way to the kitchen," he jeered, drawing a ripple of laughter from a small group nearby. Another woman, dripping in jewelry, wrinkled her nose. "Imagine someone like that thinking he could stand next to us." The insults grew bolder. The humiliation was deliberate now, like wolves circling prey they thought was weak. Manny stood, silently, his hands still behind his back, his eyes patient and kind. Not a flicker of anger crossed his face. But the spectacle was public. The crowd of wealthy elites had stopped pretending to mind their own business. Some whispered to each other, "Who is he? Why doesn't he fight back?" Others smirked, enjoying the scene like free entertainment. The musicians on stage exchanged awkward glances, their song faltering for a moment before continuing. In the corner, two younger guests, Sophie and Jacob, exchanged a look. They weren't part of the upper-class elite. They were there as guests of a friend. But they knew enough about the world to recognize injustice when they saw it. "This is going to blow up," Jacob muttered, pulling out his phone. With a quick swipe, he opened a live stream. "People need to see this." The camera's red light blinked on, broadcasting the scene to anyone scrolling through their feed. At first, only a handful of viewers joined, but with each insult hurled, At Manny, the comments began to pour in. Why are they treating him like that? He looks familiar. Stay calm, bro. We got your back. Meanwhile, Richard wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Manny, invading his space, his voice, mocking. What's the matter, cat got your tongue, or are you just embarrassed you don't belong here? His assistant laughed again, clapping mockingly. Manny lifted his eyes then, meeting Richard's glare. There was no anger, only a quiet depth that seemed to unsettle the manager for a fraction of a second. But Richard, drunk on the attention of the crowd, pressed on. This is a yacht for millionaires and billionaires, Richard said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Not for whoever you are. The guests chuckled again, though the laughter was thinner this time, less certain. A few faces in the crowd had started to frown. There was something odd about this man's composure, something dignified about the way he carried himself despite the ridicule. Sophie zoomed the live stream closer. People are recognizing him, she whispered, eyes widening as the comments multiplied. But Richard didn't notice. He was too busy humiliating a man he thought powerless, unaware that every word, every sneer, every insult was being etched into the memory of dozens of witnesses and broadcast to hundreds online. The storm was brewing, and soon the entire yacht would know the truth. The night air over the ocean was crisp, carrying faint hints of salt and champagne. The yacht's deck glowed under golden lanterns, but the mood had shifted. What was supposed to be an evening of luxury and laughter had become a stage for cruelty. Richard's voice cut through the chatter once again. You're still standing here? Didn't you hear me? He motioned to one of his assistants. Take his card, if he even has one. The assistant grinned wickedly and stepped forward, snatching a small access card from Manny's hand. He held it up for the crowd to see, waving it like a trophy. Fake, he declared without even checking. People like him don't get invited to events like this. Laughter rang out, sharp and hollow. A group of young men in tailored suits applauded mockingly, while a jeweled woman shook her head in disdain. Honestly, she muttered loud enough for others to hear, how embarrassing, sneaking into a yacht party. Pathetic. Still, Manny stood still, shoulders relaxed, expression unchanged. His silence, his refusal to argue, only fueled the villain's arrogance. Richard snatched the card back from his assistant, glanced at it, and tossed it onto the floor as if it were trash. Security, he barked. Two muscular guards in black approached, their heavy footsteps thudding against the polished deck. The crowd stirred with anticipation. Some smirked, waiting to see Manny dragged away like an intruder. Others shifted uncomfortably, their conscience nagging at them. One voice broke the tension. Wait, whispered Elena, a junior staff member who had been quietly serving drinks nearby. She had recognized the man the moment he stepped on board, but she hesitated, knowing Richard's temper and the hierarchy of this world. If she spoke up, she could lose her job. Still, she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. That's him, she whispered again, but her voice was drowned by Richard's booming arrogance. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as our guests, Richard spat, gesturing toward the guards. Escort him out. Throw him back on the dock where he belongs. The guard stepped closer. The crowd leaned in, phones tilted upward. Sophie and Jacob's livestream viewer count had exploded, hundreds, then thousands tuning in. The comments were a flood. Is that who I think it is? Don't touch him, you'll regret it. This is going viral. But Richard was oblivious. He was basking in his performance, enjoying the way people laughed and clapped at his cruelty. His entire identity was wrapped in the illusion of control, and humiliating Manny only inflated his ego. Take a good look, everyone, Richard shouted. This is what happens when nobodies try to mix with the elite. Remember his face. One of the guards reached for Manny's arm. For the first time, the boxer moved. Gently, he shifted his hand away, not aggressively, but firmly enough that the guard paused. Manny's calm gaze locked onto Richard. His silence spoke louder than words. That silence unsettled the crowd. A ripple of doubt ran through the guests. Some frowned. Some whispered, "Why is he so calm? Doesn't he look familiar? Wait. I've seen him somewhere." Elena's hands trembled as she held a tray, her eyes darting between Manny and Richard. She wanted to shout the truth, to stop the humiliation, but fear pinned her down. Still, she knew the tide was turning. Richard, sensing the unease, doubled down. He shoved a finger toward Manny's chest. "You think silence makes you powerful? You're nothing, just a fraud in a cheap shirt. Without money, without status, you're invisible here." The crowd gasped softly, not at Manny but at Richard's venom. For the first time, some guests were no longer amused. The atmosphere grew heavy, uncomfortable, and yet Manny didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't fight back. He simply stood like a rock against the crashing waves of insult. His calm presence was beginning to flip the script. The more Richard attacked, the smaller he seemed in comparison. Phones continued to record. The live stream chat exploded. "OMG, it's Manny Pacquiao. They don't realize who they're humiliating. This is going to ruin that manager's life." But on the deck, Richard was blind to the storm brewing around him. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of domination. He believed he had stripped Manny of all dignity. What he didn't know was that the moment of truth was near. The very silence he mocked was about to erupt into a revelation so powerful, it would shatter his arrogance and flip the entire yacht against him. The tension had reached its peak. The world was watching, and the fall was about to begin. The silence that followed Richard's last insult was heavier than the ocean itself. The music had stopped entirely now. The band members set their instruments aside, unwilling to soundtrack the cruelty any longer. The glittering light still bathed the deck in gold, but the mood had soured. Luxury now felt like a cage of arrogance. Richard smirked, mistaking the silence as victory. "That's what I thought," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his tailored suit. "Throw him out. Tonight we remind everyone what happens when people step out of their place." The guards reached again for Manny's arm. This time he moved, not with aggression, but with measured grace. He raised a hand, palm outward, and the guards froze instinctively. Something in his calm confidence commanded them to stop. He wasn't resisting, but he wasn't submitting either. His presence alone spoke volumes. Then, without raising his voice, Manny finally spoke. His words were soft, but in the tense silence they landed like thunder. "Before you do that, maybe you should make one call." Richard blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Manny reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The crowd watched with rapt attention. He scrolled deliberately, then pressed a number. The phone rang only once before the call connected. "Hello?" Manny said warmly. "Yes, it's me. I'm on the yacht now, but there seems to be some confusion." The person on the other end replied immediately, their voice faintly audible to those nearby. The tone was one of respect. Deep, reverent respect. Manny smiled gently. "Thank you. I'll wait." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he simply clasped his hands behind his back again, as if nothing had happened. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Who could he possibly be calling? Why did his voice sound so steady, so assured? Richard, however, scoffed. "Oh, please. Calling a friend to rescue you? How pathetic. Do you really think anyone important is going to care about you?" But his words were weaker now, his bravado cracking. The phone call unsettled him more than he admitted. Sophie and Jacob's live stream was exploding. Tens of thousands of viewers were now tuned in. Comments flew by faster than the eye could follow. "Oh my God, it really is Manny Pacquiao." Richard just signed his own career death warrant. The calm before the storm. This is epic. Elena clutched her tray tightly. Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream it out loud. That's Senator Manny Pacquiao, world champion, a living legend. But she bit her lip, still afraid of Richard's wrath. The guards, however, hesitated. They had noticed the shift. Their training told them to follow orders, but something in the way Manny carried himself, the way he commanded respect without force, made them pause. Richard noticed their hesitation and snapped. What are you waiting for? Do your job. But before the guards could move, a voice rang out from the upper deck. Stop. All eyes turned. A tall man in a crisp navy suit descended the stairs. He was the yacht's owner, Mr. Castillo, one of the most powerful businessmen in the region. His presence alone silenced the crowd. Sir. Richard straightened instantly, his arrogance crumbling into nervous politeness. I was just... Enough, Castillo interrupted, his gaze fixed on Manny. Then with a sharp inhale, recognition flashed across his face. His eyes widened, and within seconds his entire demeanor shifted. He strode quickly across the deck, brushing past Richard without a glance, and extended both hands to Manny. Senator Pacquiao, Castillo said with reverence, welcome. It is an honor to have you on my yacht. The crowd gasped collectively. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Phones tilted higher, recording every second. Richard froze. His smirk evaporated, replaced by pale disbelief. Senator? He stammered. Manny gave a polite smile and shook Castillo's hands. Thank you, he said simply, his humility shining despite the grandeur of the reveal. The energy on the deck flipped instantly. Where moments ago there was mockery, now there was awe. Guests who had laughed at him earlier now pressed forward, eager to apologize, to shake his hand, to take a photo. The livestream chat exploded. He's the owner of this party now. Richard is done. From humiliation to legend, what a comeback. Richard staggered backward, his face drained of color. His authority collapsed in real time, each second unraveling his illusion of power. The guards stepped away entirely, bowing their heads in shame for ever laying hands on Manny. Manny, however, remained calm. He didn't gloat, didn't lash out. He simply stood there with quiet dignity, allowing the truth to speak for itself. Castillo turned on Richard, his voice like ice. Do you realize what you've done? You tried to throw Manny Pacquiao off my yacht. The man is not only a world champion boxer, but also a senator, a philanthropist, a true hero of the people. And you treated him like trash. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some nodding in agreement. For the first time all evening, the weight of Richard's arrogance came crashing down on him. Manny glanced around, meeting the eyes of those who had laughed at him earlier. He didn't scold them. He didn't need to. His silence, his composure, his humility in the face of humiliation said more than words ever could. The turning point had arrived. The crowd no longer saw a nobody. They saw a giant, one whose greatness needed no flashy suit, no jewelry, no arrogance to prove itself. And Richard? He was trembling, realizing that the man he had mocked so loudly was the one man he could never hope to stand beside. The fall had begun, and there would be no recovery. The deck of the yacht buzzed like a shaken hive. Conversations overlapped in frantic whispers, the glittering crowd now surging closer, phones held high. What began as mockery had transformed into awe, disbelief, and shame. Manny Pacquiao. The name rolled across the lips of the guests like a thunderclap. Some gasped aloud, others pressed their hands over their mouths. Those who had insulted him shrank back, wishing they could vanish into the polished wooden floor. Richard Hale, the arrogant manager, stumbled backward. His face had drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He couldn't reconcile what he was hearing. Just minutes ago he had sneered at a man he thought beneath him. Now the entire yacht was bowing in respect. Mr. Castillo, the yacht's owner, kept his hands clasped around Manny's as if greeting royalty. Senator, forgive us, he said, his voice echoing across the stunned crowd. You honor us tonight, with your presence. Had I known you were boarding, I would have rolled out a red carpet. Manny smiled humbly, as he always did. There's no need for that. I came as a guest, like everyone else. The humility struck harder than any punch he had thrown in the ring. The crowd murmured in admiration. For a man of his stature to remain so simple, so calm after such humiliation, it was inspiring. The livestream Sophie and Jacob had started had now crossed 100,000 viewers. Comments flew faster than they could scroll. The humility of this man. Respect. That manager is done. His career just ended live. Manny Pacquiao on a yacht getting disrespected? This is history. Some viewers clipped the moment, sharing it across platforms. Within minutes, the video was trending. Meanwhile, Richard tried to salvage himself. Senator Pacquiao, he stammered, forcing a shaky smile. I didn't recognize you. It was just a misunderstanding. But his excuses fell flat. The crowd was no longer with him. In fact, they turned their anger toward him. Misunderstanding? You humiliated him, a woman snapped. You told him he wasn't worthy to breathe our air, another man added. This is disgusting. If you treat him like this, imagine how you treat others. Richard shrank under the verbal blows. His authority had collapsed entirely. Manny, however, raised a hand gently, calming the storm. His voice was steady, soft, but it carried power. Please. There's no need for anger. What happened is something I've experienced before. Many people are judged by what they wear, how they look, or what they seem to have. But respect, true respect, should not depend on any of that. The words cut deeper than any insult could. The crowd fell silent, listening intently. Phones captured every syllable. Manny continued. I came here tonight simply to enjoy the evening, to be part of this gathering. Yet before I could even take a step, I was told I did not belong. How many others face the same treatment every day, without the chance to prove who they are? His humility turned the humiliation into a lesson. Even those who had stayed silent earlier now looked ashamed, realizing their complicity. Mr. Castillo bowed slightly. You are right, Senator, and we should all be ashamed. This yacht, this party, means nothing if people are judged by appearances instead of character. The crowd broke into applause. Not the polite kind, but genuine, heartfelt clapping that grew into cheers. Guests who had sneered earlier now clapped the loudest, desperate to redeem themselves. Some even chanted, Manny, Manny, Manny. The live stream chat mirrored the energy. GOAT. This man is not just a champion in the ring, he's a champion of dignity. From insult to ovation, what a scene. Meanwhile, Richard stood frozen, unable to escape the judgment of hundreds of eyes and thousands online. Every moment of his arrogance had been recorded. Every insult, every sneer. There would be no hiding from it. Sophie's camera zoomed in on Manny's calm smile. This is history, she whispered to Jacob, and she was right. The clip would become iconic. Humility, triumphing over arrogance, lived for the world to see. Then came the twist that sealed Richard's fate. Mr. Castillo raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make an announcement. From this day forward, Senator Manny Pacquiao is not just a guest on my yacht. He is an honorary member of our circle. Any event I host, he will always be welcome. The crowd erupted. Again, toasting in agreement. Phones flashed, selfies snapped, and dozens of guests rushed to greet Manny, eager for a moment with the legend they had nearly rejected. Richard could only watch as his world collapsed around him. His sneers had turned into stutters, his arrogance into shame. The man he thought was a nobody was revealed to be the very heart of the celebration, the reason the evening would be remembered. And Manny? He remained as calm and humble as ever, smiling kindly, shaking hands, thanking people. No gloating, no bitterness, just quiet dignity. It was the perfect reveal. The storm had turned, and Richard was standing in the wreckage of his own pride. The cheers still echoed across the deck when Mr. Castillo's expression hardened. He turned from Manny to Richard, his voice cold enough to chill the warm night air. Richard Hale, he said, each syllable like a hammer striking steel. Do you realize the shame you have brought on this yacht? On my name? On every guest here tonight? Richard's lips trembled. He tried to bow, to stammer out an apology. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't care to know, Castillo snapped. And worse, this isn't the first time. I've heard the complaints. Guests mistreated, staff disrespected. You thought power came from belittling others. Tonight you humiliated a world champion and a senator in front of the world. He gestured toward the glowing phones and cameras, their lenses like unblinking eyes. There is no hiding from this. The crowd murmured, nodding in agreement. Some guests finally found the courage to speak up. That's right, one man said, adjusting his cufflinks. Last month Richard insulted my wife for not wearing designer clothes. Another woman chimed in, her voice sharp. He once told me my accent wasn't refined enough for his events. I stayed silent then. Not tonight. A young man raised his phone. People are watching this live right now. The truth is out. Richard's face burned as the accusations piled up. Every sneer, every act of arrogance he had ever committed was resurfacing. The foundation of authority he had built for himself was crumbling in the open. Castillo's verdict was swift. You are fired, effective immediately. Gasps and claps broke out across the crowd. The guards stepped aside, no longer loyal to Richard. His assistants lowered their heads in shame, distancing themselves from their disgraced leader. Richard tried to plead, his voice cracking. Please, I didn't mean... But the words fell flat. The crowd had turned against him, and there was no sympathy left. He had written his own downfall with every cruel word he had spoken earlier. Manny, however, lifted a hand gently, his voice carried over the noise, calm but commanding. Let us not focus on hatred. Tonight something bigger was revealed than just one man's arrogance. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned back to him. Manny continued, his tone steady, his words simple but powerful. Respect is not a luxury. It is not a privilege reserved for the rich or the powerful. It is a basic right, something every human being deserves no matter how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. If we build a world where respect is given only to status, then we have lost our humanity. The applause began softly, then grew into a roar. Guests clapped not just for the man but for the truth in his words. Elena, the staff member who had recognized Manny earlier but kept quiet, stepped forward hesitantly. Her tray trembled in her hands. Senator, I knew who you were. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid of losing my job. Manny smiled warmly at her. Courage does not always mean speaking the loudest. Sometimes it means standing by the truth quietly until the right moment. Tonight you stood with the truth in your heart, that is enough. Castillo turned to Elena, his expression softening. From this day forward, you will not carry trays. You will manage them. You are promoted to supervisor. Let your integrity lead others. The crowd cheered again, this time for her. Tears welled in her eyes as she bowed gratefully. Meanwhile, Richard stood frozen, humiliated not just by his firing, but by the applause for the very people he had tried to belittle. His assistant stepped away, unwilling to share in his downfall. He was alone. The night had shifted. What began as arrogance and insult had transformed into justice and truth. Manny's calm had dismantled cruelty without a single punch, and the world was still watching. Livestream numbers ticked higher, hundreds of thousands now, clips already spreading across platforms. The story was no longer just about a party on a yacht. It was about dignity, respect, and the collapse of arrogance in the face of humility. Justice had been served. But Manny's final lesson, the true moral of the night, was still to come. The waves lapped gently against the hull of the yacht, a quiet rhythm beneath the murmurs of a humbled crowd. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars glittering, like witnesses to what had unfolded. Where arrogance once filled the air, there was now reflection and respect. Richard Hale had been escorted off the yacht in silence. No applause, no sympathy, just the heavy sound of his footsteps and the weight of disgrace trailing behind him. His legacy on the luxury scene was over, destroyed not by scandalous rumors or competitors, but by his own arrogance, exposed under the glow of phones and live streams. Manny Pacquiao remained on deck, not as a victim but as the embodiment of quiet strength. Guests gathered around him, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of genuine admiration. Even those who had laughed at him earlier now bowed their heads, ashamed but grateful for the lesson he had delivered without anger or vengeance. Mr. Castillo raised his glass once more, this time with sincerity. "Senator Pacquiao," he said, his voice warm, "tonight has taught us all something profound. I vow that from this day forward, my events will not be measured by wealth, but by respect. Every guest, every staff member, will be treated with dignity." Applause followed, not for the yacht, not for Castillo, but for the principle being spoken aloud. Manny nodded humbly. Change does not come from speeches alone. It comes from action. If tonight is to mean anything, let it mean this: that respect is not negotiable. It does not rise with status or fall with poverty. It is the foundation of humanity itself. Elena, now promoted, stepped forward with tears still in her eyes. "Senator, your word, they give us courage. For those of us who are often ignored or overlooked, tonight you gave us a voice." Manny smiled kindly. "Then use it well. Lead with fairness, and others will follow." Around them, the guests began sharing their own realizations. One businessman admitted, "I've been guilty of judging people by appearances too quickly." A woman added, "Wealth blinded me. Tonight, I was reminded that humility is the true richness." Each confession echoed the theme Manny had ignited. Meanwhile, Sophie and Jacob's livestream had crossed 500,000 viewers. Across the globe, people watched the once humiliated man turn disgrace into dignity, cruelty into compassion, and arrogance into accountability. Clips of his calm stance and his words about respect were already going viral, stitched into motivational edits and reposted by influencers and news outlets alike. But Manny wasn't finished. Before the night ended, he approached Castillo quietly. "If you want real change," he said, "create a program. Train your staff to treat every guest equally. Audit your events so no voice is silenced. Let this yacht not only sail on waters but sail with purpose." Castillo agreed instantly, promising to implement reforms. The crowd cheered once again, not for luxury or power, but for the promise of a better system. As the night drew to a close, Manny stood at the edge of the deck, looking out at the endless horizon. The wind tugged gently at his shirt, the same simple one Richard had mocked earlier. Yet now that shirt was not a symbol of ordinary. It was a reminder that greatness is not worn, it is lived. Before leaving, Manny offered one final thought, his voice steady and timeless. "Respect isn't earned through wealth or titles. It belongs to every human being equally without condition. Remember this: when you strip away status, we are all the same, and dignity is the one thing no one has the right to take." The guests clapped once more, but this time it wasn't for spectacle. It was for truth. And as the live stream ended, its final image was Manny's humble smile, framed against the stars, an image destined to inspire millions long after the yacht lights faded into the sea.